Well, hello, good morning. It's me, Kurt Schmidt, president and partner at Foundry, here today with another episode of Schmidt List. I am very excited today because we're going to be talking about conscious leadership and why it's important. Why do we care? I don't know. We're going to find out. Kelly's going to tell us all about it. But before I get started, I do have to mention, as you know, we're hiring. Yes, we're hiring. We're always hiring. We're always hiring. So just go to foundrymakes.com/career, this thing. Go there and or send people you know. We're looking for a lot of people to join our company. We hit the Inc. 5000 list again this year in fastest growing companies, and we're excited to keep that train going. So check it out, and if you or someone you know, take a look and see. Okay, so let's jump in and talk to Kelly. Kelly, how are you today?
Good morning, Kurt. How are you?
Oh man, I am over caffeinated and ready to go.
I've had two oat milk lattes already. So
all right, we're gonna party today. Okay, so Kelly, tell me about the work you do and who you do it for.
Sure. So I am a trauma-informed conscious leadership coach, which sounds like a mouthful. I specifically work with creative agency owners. I would say creative and technology agency owners or leaders. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the founder of a shop, but someone in, executive or leadership position. And that's my background. I owned an agency for 14 years. I sold that in 2016 and have been doing coaching and consulting ever since, but now really transitioning predominantly to coaching because that is definitely where the greatest impact lies. And we're going to get into all of that today.
Yeah. Well, I applaud you for the work you do. I think it's really important work because, again, as an agency owner myself, I know that it takes a lot of effort, and there's no easy button for being a good leader, and there's no just one book I can read and then I'm all set, right? So
no manual for this. Yeah.
Oh, there's no manual. Oh, well, I wouldn't read the instructions anyway, being a white male. So
okay. Well, none of us would have read them, regardless of gender or race. I think no agency owner would probably read those instructions anyway. That's probably why the book hasn't been written.
I suppose. Okay, so tell me about conscious leadership. Why was that so attractive to you? Why should I care about it? Is there a difference between, how I approach leadership with conscious leadership?
Lots of really good questions in there. I'll try to answer the first one. So the entrance into conscious leadership for me was really, coming to terms with the fact that I owned an agency. We had great clients. I loved my team. I loved the impact that we created. We were a cause marketing firm. But at the end of the day, I really had to be very honest with myself that I was supremely unhappy. I think a lot of founders, when you start out as a practitioner and you have a lot of passion for your craft, and then you go into creating an agency and you start basically becoming a manager, putting out fires and having a tremendous amount of pressure and stress and anxiety and sleepless nights, it becomes less fun, right? So for me, it was really this deep inner knowing that I just was not happy in this particular role. And I think when you start leaning into looking at, are you pursuing the personal passion projects that you used to pursue, right? Hobbies and interests. I paint, right? And so I hadn't lifted a paintbrush in probably a decade. I was unable to, even though I claimed that I had so much freedom as a business owner, I was unable to take more than a week off for a vacation.
Sure.
It's just not sustainable. It really impacted my marriage, to be honest. And I tacked on about 40 pounds over the course of, the 14 years that I had that agency. And so from a sustainability standpoint, like personal sustainability, it just wasn't for me.
Yeah.
Even though all the other metrics, society's success metrics, looked great on paper. What those metrics don't actually take into account is the personal satisfaction and development and evolution and happiness.
Yeah.
And so I ended
Crush
up
the
selling
things
the
we
company.
love.
Exactly. So I ended up selling the company and then realizing that I, because of the acquisition, I wasn't able to start another agency, join another one in a partnership capacity, couldn't approach any of my clients, obviously. So I
Yeah.
didn't actually know what I was going to do next. And so I fell into consulting because that's sort of the obvious, right? But what happened for me and this answers your question more directly, what happened for me is that as I was consulting, I realized, okay, yes, there's a lot of value and a lot of expertise here. And I am helping these individuals to have healthier companies
Yeah.
and all of that. But as many tools and advice and guidance and advisory as I could provide, it still wasn't addressing the fact that we weren't talking about them as individuals, as
Ah,
humans. And so when I really started to put all of that together, it became, oh, okay, so we actually need to go back. We need to start way earlier in the process. This isn't actually about the scalability of the business so
yep.
much as it is the self-limiting beliefs of the agency owner, because everything historically comes from the top down.
Yeah, of
So if
course.
you
Yeah.
have an agency owner who really has all of those self-limiting beliefs and still is acting from sort of a trauma response situation from things that have happened in childhood, right? This shows up in lots of different ways. It shows up in how you talk to your team, how you think, how you speak, how you act, how you react to an email from a client, right? How you price your services, right? If there's a self-worth or a self-value issue, you're going to automatically discount. You're going to undervalue your services in the market. And so there's so much that's inextricably linked. And so once I started sort of having that of like, oh wow, this is actually where I want to be going with the coaching, I started focusing on that. And that is the beginning of conscious leadership, because we're really talking about self-awareness at that
Yeah.
point and personal development.
Yeah, because I'm sure as an agency owner, you ran into lots of agency owners, and you started to recognize patterns pretty early on, right?
Patterns that I recognize from firsthand experience, by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've experienced the same over the years, and yeah, I've found that it's really interesting because in my leadership journey, a lot of it was. Whatever company I was at was just handing me whatever new book an old white guy wrote and said, like, this is what you do, start with why, and, whatever else and all this stuff. And
Yep.
many of those books, they're very theoretical. It isn't something I could turn around and take in and start practicing with my team
Yeah.
the next day. And so, what I found was a lot of self-care made me a better leader, honestly. And I think back to
Yeah.
your point about being very conscious about how you react to things, how you're triggered. I talked about that on our last show about understanding what triggers you and how you react to those things and how you can help, best manage those things.
Right.
So tell me about, what do people, when you come into organizations, are they like, okay, yeah, how long to make me a better leader? Is it like, what's the timeline on that, Kelly?
Most people don't ask about timeline. I think it's a different conversation. So
Yeah.
most of the people, because of my sort of positioning in this landscape, I'm one of what I know of only two agency specific coaches in the world. The other guy's in Australia. Who actually focus on trauma informed conscious leadership coaching. And so it's very niche. And the most of the people, because of that positioning, they understand that they're coming to me because they are self-aware. They are understanding that they're probably the reason for some kind of plateau or a
Yeah.
holding back in some way of the business. And so they want to work through that. And they're not looking for the little blue pill or the little red pill, right? They're looking they're really looking to do the difficult work, and they need a guide to kind of help them along the way. So I don't get a lot of questions about how long is it going to take for me to become a more conscious leader. I think it's more along the lines of, how quickly can we start to translate some of the self-development into me being a better leader for my team? And is there anything that I can do from the beginning to communicate that this is the direction that we're moving in as an organization, right? Like that I'm
Right.
super committed to it.
Well, let's talk about that beginning part. Where, if I'm interested in exploring this idea and learning more about it, I mean, what is usually your first suggestion on how do I get started down that path?
In terms of the beginning of the coaching relationship.
Yeah.
So the beginning for me always looks like an intake with everyone on the team, because I want to know, of course, I'm going to be working directly with you as the agency leader, but your perspective is only one, right? And for me, it's really important to have that kind of 360 perspective from everyone on your team, everyone from your COO all the way down to your summer intern, right? Everyone's going to have a different perspective because they're going to have a different interaction with you, a different experience of you. So it's really important for me to get that information up front. So I'll do those intake sessions, which is about 30 to 45 minutes with each individual team member. Then we go into a deep dive session with the leader. Once those intakes are complete, summary synthesis of findings and a set of recommendations comes out of that as well. But then we really deep dive into the agency leader, him or her themselves. So there we're talking about going all the way back to childhood. Tell me about the relationship with your parents. What kind of relationship did you have with money in your household? All of these different things that it gives me a fabric from which to sort of pull the threads of
Yeah.
as we start looking at, so let's use money as the example, right? Because that's a pretty common one. If you grew up in a household where it was very blue collar and there was a lot of money scarcity and sort of scarcity mindset around like,
Yep.
oh, we can't have this or we can't afford this. And this is what you heard as a kid growing up. And there's this idea that you have to work hard in order to be successful, right? I need to know that that's your mindset coming in, because what I'm probably going to see is a lot of translation of those things in your business. And so if we want to unpack and unravel those things, we have to start with you first, right? So that's a really good example around self-worth and money and all of that.
So let's say personally, I'm interested in looking into what should I be thinking about before I call a Kelly, or where do you normally see, what are some of the problems that people maybe are recognizing in themselves that that you see when they're calling you or they're contacting you?
So that kind of spans the gamut. Sometimes it's I blew up at an employee and I don't want to be that person.
Yeah.
I took my work home with me and ended up, because of frustration or things that I didn't know how to actually unpack or deal with at work, I took that out on my spouse when I got home. Now it's creating friction there. Lots and lots of different things. But I think a lot of it comes down to behavior, like reactionary behavior that they catch themselves. And it's like,
Yeah.
ooh, there's something going on here that I don't really like what I'm seeing in myself. Maybe I need some help. Or maybe it's, I notice that when I am in presentations, proposal reviews, things like that, I'm not exactly sure how to present as confident. I automatically go to, well, sure, let me placate the prospect. Or if they push back on pricing, I automatically kind of cower and say, oh yeah, we can definitely work on pricing. We can, come up with a discount, or, all of these different
Discount.
things. Yeah. So it's things like that. Or it's, hey, I've been at this for 7, 8, 9 years. I really thought that we'd be at a different place financially, and I thought that I'd be at a better place mentally or emotionally. And I'm not
Right.
happy where we're at this long, this far into the ownership of the business. So I
Yeah.
think, lots and lots of different reasons as to how people come to me or realize that they need some help.
I literally, with an agency owner, just had that conversation like a week ago, where they were like, I've been at this a long time, and I hit a wall this year, and where, everything you just said, like, we're not where we should be financially, we're not growth wise,
Yeah.
The types
And we
of
don't have a
clients we
plan.
want to work with, the type of work we're doing,
Right. Right.
all of these things. And I mean, I wish self-awareness was a bit more prevalent, at least, or maybe it showed up sooner for some people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's
You
sort
know.
of, I call it, jokingly, I call it the gateway drug to conscious leadership, right?
Ah,
So,
nice.
so self-awareness is the first step, right? If you're going
Yeah,
to
tell me
say,
more about
well,
that.
what's the journey look like? It's,
Yeah.
I become self-aware, right? I recognize that there's something in me that's, maybe I wouldn't call it unhealed, but that's really what it is. There's something in me that's holding me back, or something in me that just isn't right, or something that I'm constantly chasing, things along these lines. So there's a self-awareness component. Then you go into the breakdown, right? So you're literally going into these unhealed, traumatic memories, events, situations that have happened to you in the past, sometime in the past. It could even be as in early adulthood, right? It doesn't have to only be in childhood. I have a client who has one of these traumatic issues from early adulthood, from his first job. And so, it doesn't really matter when it happened, but there are things that imprint upon us. And unless we actually face them and go into them and try to figure out what happened, what was the story and the narrative that we created around that, and are we carrying that with us today, and how is that impacting us, versus what was the reality of that situation if I had looked at it from a healed lens, right? If I looked at that as, let's say, the adult version of Kelly versus the small childlike version of Kelly, how would I look at that situation differently? Is there a perception versus a reality? So we work on those things together, and then we start translating that into the business. And again, it's going to have legs into so many different aspects.
Oh, sure.
Yes, how you deal with your team, how you deal with your kids, how you deal
Yeah.
with your spouse, right? Because we're integrated humans. We're not like one person at work and one person at home. We're just human.
Yeah. We'd like to believe we are. We'd like to believe it's two separate individuals.
I
See
don't
a lot
know.
of people try to
Would we
fool
like
themselves.
to? Yeah, it's a fooling. It's definitely a fooling, because it's not true.
No.
And the more that you try to create that separation, the more angst you feel, because what you're trying to do is live one life in, or one aspect of your life in authenticity and integrity, and the other one with a veneer or a mask or a facade. And it's
Mm-hmm.
really hard to keep those two things up. I did it myself for many, many, many years. And the emotional weight of that is
Yeah.
exhausting.
Yeah. And I think, again, going back to, we tend to crush the things we love, hug them to death. I think it's important because, I've done some coaching with other owners as well. And one of the things that I always ask them is like, what sort of dent in the universe do you want to make? And they're like, well, I want a really cool agency with really cool clients. I'm like, no, that's not what I'm asking. What change in the world do you want to see? Those types of questions. And it really can stump some of these folks because they haven't thought, on a broader scheme, because, you go to business school, they teach you, the reason a business exists is to make money.
Right.
That's why business exists. And it's like, that's such a simplistic, ridiculous answer. And I was watching a talk not long ago by one of the co-founders of Whole Foods, and he had talked about, the importance of knowing what sort of legacy you want to leave behind, what sort of dent in the universe you want to make, and how does that business help you achieve that? Not just how does the business help make money, but how does it help you or empower you as the owner, founder, CEO, whatever the case may be, the person where the buck stops. How does it help you achieve, this life you want to live, this dent in the universe you want to make? And to your point, what I see is you just get caught up so much in the day-to-day, the grind of it, that at the end of the day, you just need time to recharge. You're not thinking long-term. You're not thinking, out in the future. And all of a sudden you wake up 10 years later and you're like, what the hell am I doing here?
Right.
Right. And, do you find that, Do you find that is there a similar language that people are using when they're stuck in this thing, or is it all across the map? Is it all over the place? Is it a lot of blame, or are they feeling more like it's all their fault? You get where I'm going?
Yeah. It's a really good question. There's definitely commonality.
Okay.
And I think so my answer to that is depending upon the level of self-awareness that the agency leader has will determine the language that they use, right? So if they're more self-aware, they might say things like, I know I'm probably part of the problem. I may be like the majority of the problem, right? If they're less self-aware, they may come in saying, I don't understand it. Why do all of these young millennials feel so entitled and there's a lot
It's
of
those
blaming,
damn millennials in Generation
right?
Z. It's all their
It's like,
fault.
come on, guys. And it's interesting because my experience with a younger workforce in my agency was the complete opposite, right? Like I found that they were extremely dedicated. They were very well boundaried, right? Like I'm not going to work on the weekends. I'm not going to answer emails,
Yeah.
or I prioritize my health, my well-being, my paid time off. And what that showed me, because I was very much similar to what you're talking about, that whole like, this is why we're in business, and I've got to grind and hustle, and I've got to be the first one in, the last one to leave, and work the hardest, and all these things. That is really just societal pressure. That's a false narrative that we've all been fed. And the reality is, the slower you go, the more that you value your people, the more that you have this concern for the environment, the profitability is a lagging indicator, right? It comes as part of that, right? So conscious leadership, if we think about what it actually is, it is the decision to be more sustainable in all aspects of your life and business. And so what I mean by that is sustainable from a self-care, from an individual standpoint, sustainable from the standpoint of your team, especially if you're in the service-based industry. Your people are your product, right? Even if you have a product type of organization, a retail organization, you still need humans to run that business in some way, shape, or form, right? So people are the most important thing. So valuing them so that it is sustainable, so that you don't have churn, right? You don't have employee attrition, which is incredibly expensive to replace them, right? And so if you value the self and value the employees, then, and also value your carbon footprint and, make sure that you are keeping the environment in mind, to me, the profit aspect of this is just on the same line. It's not above, it's not necessarily below, but it's certainly a lagging indicator, because if you follow that whole path, which is really conscious leadership, if you follow that whole path, profitability will naturally flow. This is the idea of money follows value, right? So yeah, it's the question of why should you care about this is if you want to have a sustainable business, not necessarily one that just spikes up, makes a lot of money, and then, goes away. For lots of different reasons, then you care about conscious leadership because you want to stay in business. You want longevity. That's really the answer.
Yeah, no, and I love that you brought up sustainability as part of it, because again, it's a marathon, not a sprint, even though you can treat every single day as a sprint very, very easily. And if you're not looking much further out and spending the energy to be that kind of, what does the future look like? What does my day look like in the future? What roles do I need in order to help me get to that point, right? Because as a owner, you wear a lot of hats, and at some point, usually 6 months to a year too late, you hire someone to take over those pieces for you. And by then you're already frantic. And so it is a natural cycle, but back to the point of understanding that we have a bigger goal we're going after, and sustainability, to your point, isn't necessarily mean we've got money in the bank, right? It means I've got, I've got more emotional labor I can do. I've got better muscles.
Money in the bank is part of it. I don't want to
Yeah.
say that, that we're just going to be in business um, to only care about people and planet and not care about profit, because then 97% of the people would tune out of that conversation, and it's actually not
Sure.
true, right? Like, it's not true. I
Yeah.
think where we get into an issue is when we put people and planet on the opposite polarity
Right.
from profit, right? That's where we get into the issue. If we just changed our mindset and just reframed it to say, do the right thing, right? Like, do the right thing by your people and by the environment, that the profit will naturally follow, right? And if you give people more time and you support them from a mental and emotional health and physical health standpoint, they're going to be more productive. They're going to represent your organization in a more dedicated way. It's just going to follow. I mean, that's just how it works.
Yep.
And but it's antithetical, and I think that's the big issue. A lot of owners come from this mindset of they've got to be in the office, right? Prior to the pandemic, but like, they've
Yep.
got to be in the office. They've got to be working at least 8 hours a day. I have to be able to see what they're doing. There's this micromanagement and some mindset that you sitting in a particular place 8 hours a day means that you're working, right? Versus all of the agency leaders who have figured out that from a remote work standpoint, when you're more flexible about the time that when an employee works, you actually get a lot more out of them, because
Mm-hmm.
you're allowing them to have that creative breathing room, right? Or
Yep.
you're allowing them to go for a walk in the middle of the day, or to go do something in their garden, or whatever the case may be, right?
Yep.
Something that gives them a little bit more of that energizing effect that space and time creates. Some companies are allowing their people to work asynchronously, which I think is really great. If you are not in a situation where, let's say, crisis PR, you can't do that, right?
Yep.
Right? That's not going to work. But
Yep.
if you are in the type of agency or the type of organization where you can allow for that, that's really attractive to people, because now you're talking about life work integration for the employees, right? You're going to have a really easy time hiring if you lean into that.
Yeah,
And
especially in a
then,
creative firm, right? Because people
absolutely,
aren't creative exactly from 9 to 5, right?
it doesn't just turn on when you sit down on your desk, right? You're ruminating, you're thinking, you're
I've
right.
worked
You
at those
need that
agencies.
space.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
Where it's
I think
like,
we
oh,
all
it's 8
have.
a.m. Time to be creative.
Right, right. What do you mean you don't have the big idea by 10 a.m.? Yeah, and I think the other component of this that we haven't necessarily touched on just yet is conscious leadership is outside of the self and the organization. It
Mm,
actually extends beyond that, right?
okay.
And this is probably what you heard when you talked about John Mackey. It's probably it's definitely outside of the organization in terms of impact to the community, potentially impact in your industry, right? Like, how disruptive are you in the industry? What are you contributing in that industry, in that community? And
Mm-hmm.
then in the world at large. So there's a ripple effect that happens when you do the right thing, which, in the write-up of this show, you talked about Aristotle, right? Like, this is not a brand new concept.
Right.
We have just gotten away from the do the right thing concept in favor of profit. And we're finding that, yes, it worked for a little while for a small percentage of
Yep.
people, for their bank accounts, but it doesn't work for the masses, and it is not
Mm-hmm.
sustainable. So that's why we need to change.
Yeah, it's funny. I bring it up too. The whole idea of agile and these types of things that are so popular today. I'm like, it's really just the scientific method. It was,
Right.
invented centuries ago. These aren't new concepts, but again, if we're looking at, if it's so hard when you're the solopreneur or the only person. It's a very lonely position, and it's hard to get. I mean, I've seen it. It's hard to just get over yourself, which is, really some of the advice I give. It's blunt, but it's like, you just get over yourself. Like, and I've coached. other leaders before where they don't realize the ripple effect that they have inside of their organizations because
Yeah.
I've explained it as people are because you're at your desk, people assume that because of that visual cue that they have to be at their desk, even though you might not necessarily care too much. If you go to lunch exactly at noon every day, like people are going to say, okay, that's the time it's okay to go to lunch. And I'll have these conversations with leaders and they're like, that's not true. And I'm like, oh, it's 100% true.
Yeah. Yeah.
As the owner or the founder, you give off these ripple effects that are so huge. I mean, I did a video not too long ago about like slacks that make you think you're getting fired. So
God.
a Slack is like, hey, do you got a second?
Right. What not
and
to
I'm
do.
like, and another leaders are like, oh, that's ridiculous. And I'm like, no, you haven't been an employee for a long time. You don't understand what that means, what that impact is.
And you're making some really, really good points. Like what you're talking about is consciousness from the standpoint of how you're communicating, regardless of the methodology, right? It could be on Slack or email or
Right.
phone call or text or whatever, right? But like having the empathy and the awareness to understand how your communication style, tone, language, right? All of those things could be interpreted or received on the other end. Like that's the level of awareness that we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
It's super, super interesting that
And
people
I found,
don't realize.
right. I found that, I'd love your opinion on this. It might seem kind of overwhelming and challenging at first to really start thinking about all this, but once it's in practice, it's almost like a weight gets lifted because, you're just being more intentional feels like you're more in control, I guess.
Oh, that's an interesting way to put it. I don't disagree with that. I think what I would say is that being more authentic, more intentional is just closer to sort of your own truth.
Mm-hmm.
It's closer to your own integrity, I guess I would say.
Sure.
And so you're not trying to create that veneer that I talked about before, right? Like and it also becomes really fluid, right? Like it may seem a lot. Some people that are listening or watching this might say, oh, well, that sounds like a ton of work, right? Like I have to really think about every single thing I say and write and whatever. And
Exactly. Right.
the answer is yes, you do. You should be anyway. But
Yeah.
if there's a gap between where you're at right now and where that level is, that's okay, right? That's just where you need to go. But it will become more fluid, right? This is just like anything else. It just requires a little bit of practice. And then once it becomes fluid, then it's like, wow, well, what happens on that end? You become more comfortable being more transparent in your communications. Your employees trust you more, right? There's so many positive things that happen once you get to the point where, that's pretty much how you're leading.
Yeah. Yeah. And let's talk real quick. I want to, at the end of the show here, I want to talk about the people I want to talk to the people that work for these people. What advice would you give to people? It's really, I don't see a lot of employees feeling like knocking on the boss's door and saying, hey, you should probably call this Kelly I saw because she could help you be a better person. What advice do you give to those people that might be working with someone that maybe is struggling a bit in this area, and what would be your advice on how they could help make their place a better place to work?
Yeah, great questions. I have actually had 2 situations in the last 5 years where an employee did send their
That's not
their
awkward
boss
at all,
my
but okay.
website. But yeah, that was interesting. But the advice to the employees is really self-advocacy, right? It is about maintaining those boundaries, communicating clearly what you want and need and desire in order for you to be successful in your role, right? That's one of the intake questions that I ask is, how could you be better set up for success than you are right now?
I
And
see.
the questions or the answers that I get back to that question are fascinating, right? And so my follow up, sort of off, it's all offline, but my follow up to that is: have you communicated this
Mm,
to your manager or to the CEO, depending upon the size and the culture of the organization? And most of them say no,
no.
right? And so for me, it's about if you are on the receiving end of all of these unbelievably difficult, impossible deadlines, and you're being forced to sort of work on weekends or after hours in a salaried position, you get to push back, is my answer. Like, you get to say, my health and well-being are priorities for me, and
Mm-hmm.
so I will not be answering emails after 8 p.m.
Yep.
or whatever. I will not be doing this on the weekend. If there are things that you want to add to my plate, I'm really game to take them. But you also have to help me prioritize which ones you'd like done first, second, third, because I can't take on more. It's the same thing as when we're talking to a client or a prospective client, and the prospective client says, can we just add on this other thing, but keep the cost the same? The answer is no. It's more
No.
work, right? So why would you do that? Why would you feel okay having that conversation with a prospective client and then turn around and do the opposite to your employees? So
It's a really good point,
for the employees, like self advocacy. And honestly, you don't actually know what that does for your manager, for your director, for the CEO. What you're doing is you're reflecting. You're basically the canary in the coal mine. You're
Mm,
saying something's not right here about the culture. And I bet that you probably have less to worry about than you think. They probably appreciate that reflection and that feedback.
yeah, I've given that advice too before. Is exactly that. Is that if you haven't tried, you might be surprised at the reaction you get.
Yeah, and you can say it in a really compassionate
Yeah.
and totally fine way. You
Right.
don't have to lean into blaming or anger or any of those things, even though you might be a little angry or disappointed.
It could start there.
But yeah, but take a minute, right? Like, if there's one more thing that gets piled onto your plate and you just snap and you lose it, that's probably not the best time to approach your
Right.
your
Right.
CEO. So take a minute. And I also think that it probably should not be an email. If you have the relationship where you're able to, if you're in office, go and meet with this person in person, or if it's on, if you're working remotely, offer to schedule some time to talk with them on Zoom.
Yeah.
15 minutes, 20 minutes. It's not a huge thing, but I think the face to face in a conversation like this really helps, because you're having a human to human conversation as opposed to trying to skirt it by writing an email. So there's a
Yeah.
little courage that's necessary for this.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I would do, and that's what I advocate for my clients' employees.
I love it, Kelly. Kelly, I could talk to you all day long, but we do have to cut it. But thank you so much for taking the time. If I want to know more about you and then the work you do, where do I go? Where do I find more info?
Yeah, my website is just klcampbell.com, and all the info that you need is right there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate the work you do. It's very important.
Thanks, Kurt. And I really appreciate what you're doing with this series. It's great, and I love the content. I love the topics that you're covering. So thanks
I
for doing this
appreciate
in the
it.
world too.
Thank you. Okay, everyone, we are out today, or well, we're done for today. There'll be more live shows next week. Did I mention that we're hiring? Yes, of course we are. Yeah, I mention it every show because we're hiring a lot. So take time to come and join us and forward this to other people. Let them know, that we're looking for folks. And if you have ideas on conscious leadership, make sure you reach out, follow Kelly on all the social medias, check out her website, leave a comment below if you have some questions or things that you want to see us talk about in a future episode. Other than that, have a great day.